I should have known something was wrong the moment my phone buzzed with a message that didn't start with "Hi, Camille," just a generic, "Dinner this Saturday? We have exciting news to share. Love, Mom." In our family, excitement was rarely a good sign. It usually meant something was about to be taken from me or handed to Charlotte. The last time they summoned us all like this, I came home from work to find my first car missing from the driveway. Sold. Quietly. The money had gone to Charlotte for a starter fund when she landed her first internship at a private equity firm. They said, I'd understand someday. I didn't. That was almost 10 years ago. I still don't. I didn't reply right away. I stared at the message for several minutes, rereading exciting news like it was some kind of riddle. Eventually, I typed a neutral, "Sure, what time?" My mother responded in seconds, like she'd been waiting with the phone in her hand. 6 p.m. sharp. Formal, please. Formal. Always formal at Oak Ridge. That was the rule. Saturday came quickly. The drive from my apartment near downtown Charlottesville to the estate took 25 minutes, long enough to rehearse a version of myself that could smile on cue and not flinch when the inevitable comparisons surfaced. Charlotte's new clients, Charlotte's wedding photos, Charlotte's renovation project. Camille, how is the museum? Still, doing exhibits? I turned onto the long gravel drive lined with leafless oaks, their branches like crooked fingers pointing at the gray sky. The air was damp with that particular chill of early spring in Virginia. Everything just on the cusp of blooming, but not quite ready. The house came into view slowly. Tall windows, weathered brick, that old porch swing my grandfather insisted on repairing every year. I didn't park in the main circle. Never had. That space was for Charlotte's BMW now. Instead, I pulled into the side lot near the garden, next to the shed where I used to sneak away and read old mystery novels as a teenager. Inside, everything was exactly as I remembered. The faint scent of lemon polish, the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the way the light from the foyer dimmed as you stepped onto the Persian rug. "Camille," my mother said, appearing at the top of the stairs in a navy dress and pearl earrings. "You're right on time," I smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." The dining room hadn't changed in decades. 12-foot ceilings, heavy mahogany table, the same silver candlesticks from my grandparents' wedding. My father was already seated at the head of the table checking something on his phone. Charlotte sat to his right in a cream blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Rachel, beside her, wore a wine-colored dress and that signature smile that made everything feel like a performance. "Hey, Camille," Rachel said. "Love your coat. Is it vintage?" "Sort of," I replied, slipping it over the back of my chair. "Estate sale." My mother poured the wine. "We're so glad you could make it. I know you've been busy with the museum." "Yes, the Revolutionary War exhibit opens in 2 weeks," I said, but my voice trailed off. No one asked a follow-up. Instead, the conversation moved to Charlotte's recent work, something about closing a deal for a biotech client. Everyone nodded, impressed. My father even chuckled. "I always said you had the Stratton instinct for negotiation." Dinner was roast chicken with rosemary and fingerling potatoes. Classic, safe. Talk bounced around like a tennis match. Charlotte, Rachel, my parents, back to Charlotte. I ate quietly, smiling at the right moments. I used to think silence was survival. Now I wasn't so sure. Then came dessert, apple tart, my mother's specialty, and my favorite. She placed the dish gently in front of me. "Still your favorite, I hope." "It is," I said, trying not to let my guard down. As we took our first bites, she glanced at my father, who nodded. Forks clinked. Napkins were adjusted. My mother set down her glass. "Camille, darling, we asked you here tonight because we've made a decision about Oak Ridge." I looked up slowly. Charlotte was already smiling. My father cleared his throat. "It's time to plan for the future. This house has served our family well for generations, and we want it to remain in good hands. So we've decided to transfer Oak Ridge to Charlotte and Rachel." The room went very still. My hand froze on the edge of the tart plate. I forced my expression to stay neutral. I'd spent years mastering that mask. "I see," I said. "They'll keep the tradition alive," my mother continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Host gatherings, maintain the garden, perhaps start a family one day." Charlotte looked pleased. Rachel reached for her hand. I took a sip of water. "Did you check the deed before making this decision?" My father frowned, as if I'd asked whether the sky was blue. "Liam from the firm is handling everything. It's all under control." Of course it was. The conversation. The trust binder, tucked beneath a stack of exhibition drafts in my desk drawer, was still intact. Legal terms I'd long since memorized stared back at me. Revocable trust, primary beneficiary, sole trustee. All written in the stark, factual language of law, but layered with something deeper, intention. I glanced around my apartment. Modest, 2 bedrooms, both small, bookshelves packed with museum catalogs and novels I rarely lent out, a gallery wall of framed family photos, snapshots from birthdays, graduations, lake weekends, my face always a little to the side, always just outside the spotlight. No one ever asked why I still had that carport leak patched instead of fixed, or how I managed to send monthly checks to Oak Ridge's groundskeeping service, long after my parents stopped hiring formal staff. I never told them that the new roof they'd praised was paid for with money from my personal savings account, because what would be the point? I closed the binder and texted Howard Galloway. Howard had been my grandfather's lawyer since before I was born, a quiet man with a mind like a steel trap and a voice that always sounded like he was halfway through telling you a secret. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but he replied quickly. "Howard, still at the old office tomorrow at 10? Me. See you then." The next morning, I stopped for coffee at the little corner cafe near the museum. My assistant Marcus was already inside, waving through the window with 2 to-go cups in hand. "Double shot, no room, just like always," he grinned. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. "Yeah, just family things, you know." He didn't push. That was one of the things I appreciated most about Marcus. He read the room. He chatted briefly about our incoming shipment of artifacts and a last-minute tour group, and then ducked out with a bright, "Good luck with the mystery meeting." Howard's office smelled like cedar and history. Nothing had changed. His secretary nodded me in without a word. He stood when I entered, dressed in one of those wool suits that look like they've been passed down through law firms instead of families. "Camille, you look just like your grandfather when you furrow your brow like that." "I read the letter," I said, setting it on his desk. Howard adjusted his glasses and skimmed the handwriting. He was never one for ambiguity, was he? "No," I said quietly. "He wasn't." He nodded toward a chair. "Sit. Let's talk trust logistics." For the next 30 minutes, we went line by line through the Oak Ridge Trust. He confirmed what I already knew. Legally, I held full decision-making authority. The house was in the trust's name. My parents had no legal claim to transfer ownership unless I authorized it, which, obviously, I hadn't. "And it's still valid?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "Absolutely, ironclad," he said, tapping the final page. "Your grandfather made sure of it. I've been filing the property taxes and processing the legal renewals with your silent authorization for 10 years. 10 years, almost $500,000. That's what I'd spent gradually, piece by piece, to keep Oak Ridge from falling into disrepair. Some came from my salary, some from grants Granddad had arranged as part of the trust's secondary assets. But most of it? Most came from simply not living the life Charlotte did. No new car every 5 years, no beach house rentals, no law school loan forgiveness arranged over cocktails. Howard slid a printed ledger across the desk. "This is your full contribution record, in case they ask." I stared at the numbers. Somehow, seeing it documented felt more intimate than I expected. "They won't take this well," Howard added gently, "especially your father. but the law is on your side." I nodded, then looked out his window where the trees were just starting to bud. "What are my options?" I asked. "You could let it ride," he said. "Say nothing. When they try to finalize the transfer with the lawyer handling the estate, Liam Cortez, right? He'll run into the trust and they'll come back to you. Messier but effective, or I get ahead of it," I finished. Howard gave a half smile. "Your grandfather would call that controlling the narrative." "I'm not interested in drama," I said softly, "but I won't be erased from the place I've quietly protected." He reached for a yellow legal pad and jotted something down. "Then I suggest you speak with Liam directly, calmly. With documentation," I exhaled slowly. "Schedule the meeting. I want to be the one to tell him." Howard gave a single nod of approval. "Good. That's the trustee talking." Lawyers love surprises when they're the ones springing them. This time, I was the one holding the trap door. As I walked through the pristine glass doors of Blackwell and Cortez, a chill trailed behind me. It wasn't the March wind. It was the weight of what I was carrying in the Navy portfolio pressed against my side. A decade of silence. $500,000 in quiet upkeep. A trust nobody in my family remembered, or maybe chose to forget. The receptionist smiled, one of those professional smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. "Can I help you?" "I have a meeting with Liam Cortez." "Camille Stratton." She typed something quickly. "He's expecting you. Take the elevator to the 10th floor, first door on your right." The elevator ride was quiet, but my thoughts weren't. I remembered something my father once said when I was barely out of college. Ownership is paperwork. Emotion is irrelevant. It was a cold kind of wisdom, the kind that aged poorly in real life. But maybe that was the only kind of logic he trusted. Now I held the paperwork he never thought to ask about. Liam's office was sleek and neutral, like it wanted to feel important without trying too hard. Glass walls, brushed metal finishes, books aligned like soldiers behind his desk, a conference table stretched along the window, and that's where he stood, waiting for me. "Camille," he said, extending a hand. "Thanks for coming in." "Thanks for making time," I replied, shaking his hand. He looked younger than I remembered. Sharper, too. Last I saw him, he was a summer associate at a barbecue, clumsily balancing a beer and a plate of ribs, while my father praised Charlotte's latest internship. Now he was the one in charge of transferring the estate I had protected in silence. I placed the Navy folder on the table and slid it across to him. "Before you proceed with the Oak Ridge transfer, I need you to review this." He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Just opened the folder and started reading. The silence stretched. First he skimmed, then he flipped back to the beginning and read slower. I watched as his confidence flattened into concern, then into something more cautious. By the time he reached the notarized final page and the breakdown of trust disbursements, his mouth was slightly open. "This is legitimate," he said, more to himself than to me. "It is. You're the trustee of Oak Ridge. For over 10 years now. And your parents don't know?" Number. That was the stipulation. My grandfather asked for confidentiality until disclosure became necessary. And now, apparently, it is. He ran a hand through his hair, then looked up at me. "Camille, these financial records, this is almost $500,000 in personal contributions. Give or take. Some of it came from my salary, some from the investment returns of the trust. None of it came from family conversations. Why didn't you tell them? Would they have listened?" Liam leaned back in his chair, clearly reevaluating the woman in front of him. I wasn't the museum curator's sister anymore. Not just the quiet one who smiled politely through holidays and got cut out of plans without notice. "What do you want to happen here?" he asked finally. I paused. "I want to avoid disaster. I want the truth to come out in a way that doesn't humiliate them, but also doesn't let them pretend anymore." He nodded slowly. "This transfer can't proceed legally. The estate is bound in the trust. Your father's going to need to be informed." I shook my head. Number, I'll tell him. I want to be the one who sets the narrative, not another surprise that lands on his desk. Liam looked surprised, impressed even. Then I'll set the meeting. It won't be easy. I don't expect it to be. He hesitated, then said carefully, I hope you know what kind of storm you're stepping into. I've lived in that storm most of my life, I replied. This time I'm walking in with an umbrella. I stood, smoothing the front of my blazer. As I turned to leave, a quote on the wall near the hallway caught my eye. Framed in silver, etched in elegant script. Justice isn't loud, it's firm. I didn't smile, but I walked taller. The drawing room at Oak Ridge had always been too pristine for comfort. Its lemon-polished wood, velvet drapes, and looming portraits made the air feel thick, like breathing through tradition itself. I stood near the fireplace, fingers grazing the marble mantel, watching everyone sip champagne as if they'd just inherited royalty. Charlotte was in her element, perched confidently on the edge of a damask armchair, gesturing with one hand while holding her glass in the other. The East Wing will make the perfect nursery, she said, beaming at Rachel. We could open the bay windows, maybe even knock out that wall by the old conservatory. Rachel nodded, eyes shining. With that much space, twins wouldn't even feel crowded. My mother sat across from them, smiling politely as if approving every syllable with a silent nod. My father, flanked by Liam Cortez, had a scotch in hand and a gaze fixed firmly on nothing. I didn't bother looking for AP. I waited. I listened to their plans for my grandfather's study, for the garden path he spent years restoring, for the mural I personally paid to have cleaned after years of smoke damage. Rachel glanced toward me, finally remembering I was in the room. Oh, Camille, we'll need your signature on some of the transfer forms. Just a formality, of course. Liam has the packet. I didn't blink. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the leather portfolio. I walked over to the antique coffee table, the one my grandmother once protected with hand-crocheted doilies, and laid the folder gently on its center. There's something you all should see before anyone signs anything. Charlotte gave me a look that was half smirk, half pity. Camille, if this is about renovations, we can set up a meeting later. I opened the folder. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was sudden, like a vacuum had pulled all pretense out of the room. My father leaned forward, squinting at the documents. Charlotte stood up and moved closer, her brows pulling tight. Rachel tilted her head but said nothing. Liam remained standing in the corner, his face unreadable. This is the trust, I said. Grandfather set it up when I was 21. He made me the trustee of Oak Ridge, not the beneficiary. I've been responsible for the taxes, the mortgage, and every maintenance cost since he passed. Margaret looked like she'd swallowed glass. That can't be. It can, I replied. And it is. I've spoken with Howard Galloway. It's all legally airtight. Charlotte stepped forward, voice clipped. Why wouldn't you say something? We've been making plans. Because, I said evenly, you never asked. Thomas's voice came hard and fast. You're accusing your own family of stealing a house? I didn't flinch. I'm saying this house isn't yours to give away, and it hasn't been for a long time. There was a beat, an unbearable, cavernous beat, before my mother whispered, So, now what? I looked to Liam. We renegotiate, I said, letting the weight of the words settle over the room. Liam cleared his throat. The transfer can't proceed as originally drafted. Camille's legal authority supersedes any verbal agreements or estate planning you've discussed. Charlotte's face turned crimson. This is a stunt. A calculated ambush. No, I said, quiet but firm. This is a correction, and it's long overdue. Rachel, ever composed, placed her champagne glass down. Camille, what are you looking for? A payout? A public apology? I looked straight at her. I'm looking for accountability, for the truth to be acknowledged, and for this house to stop being a pawn. The room remained still. Even the air seemed to hesitate. From the doorway, I saw Mrs. Woodbury, our longtime housekeeper, standing quietly. She hadn't changed much, still wore the same crisp apron, still carried that same expression of knowing far more than she said. Our eyes met, and for the first time in years, I felt something like steadiness return to my spine. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. You don't need to shout to be heard. Just hold the truth long enough. Tonight I wasn't shouting. I was holding the truth. And it was enough. My sister always won the arguments. She had a way of making certainty sound like kindness, of turning other people's doubts into her victories. But this wasn't about winning. It was about holding the line long enough for truth to stand on its own. The meeting was set for 10 a.m., and I arrived 15 minutes early. Old habits. Howard Galloway's office still smelled faintly of furniture polish and legal ink. Cool marble floors clicked beneath my flats, and the oak-paneled walls absorbed the morning's tension. Liam stood near the reception desk reviewing his notes. His tie was crooked. "Camille," he greeted with a nod, "everyone's just about ready." "Good," I said. "Let's not pretend this will be pleasant." Howard emerged from his office, his steps slower than I remembered, but his grip still firm when we shook hands. "We've got the documents prepped and copies ready to distribute. Dr. Shaw is already connected on Zoom." I followed them into the main conference room, long walnut table, windows partially shuttered. On the far screen, Dr. Monica Shaw appeared calm and poised. A preservation expert from Massachusetts, she looked exactly how I imagined someone hired to protect family estates from bad taste and good intentions. One by one, the others filed in. Charlotte walked in first, composed but colder than usual, with Rachel just a step behind. Rachel offered me a tight smile, less icy than before, but still guarded. My parents entered together. Dad looked irritated. Mom looked tired. We sat. A breath passed before Howard cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I'll begin by confirming that the Stratton Trust, originally filed in 2011, remains valid and enforceable. Ms. Camille Stratton has served as trustee for the past 10 years, with no legal breaches or conflicts of interest. The property in question, Oak Ridge, falls entirely under the trust's domain." A quiet descended, the kind that settles into your bones. Charlotte leaned forward. "And what exactly does that mean for the rest of us?" Dr. Shaw answered before I could. "It means any renovations, sales, or changes to the estate must comply with the preservation clauses written into the trust. There are specific stipulations regarding structural integrity, heritage conservation, and community access." "In plain English?" Dad said, arms folded. "It means," I began, "no knocking down the east wing to build a tennis court, no gutting the library, no subdividing the land." Rachel glanced toward me. "Camille, did you always intend to reveal this?" "No," I admitted. "I hoped I wouldn't have to. But when the champagne toast turned into a land transfer party, I didn't have a choice." Charlotte bristled. "You made this about power." "I made this about truth." Howard pushed a small stack of papers toward Charlotte. "The financial record of Ms. Stratton's contributions over the last decade, roughly $486,000 in mortgage, taxes, and preservation work." My father's face reddened. "You used family funds?" "No," I said softly. "I used my own. Museum salary, grants, weekend lectures. You never asked why I skipped holidays. I was working, so Oak Ridge wouldn't fall apart." Rachel picked up one of the sheets, her brow furrowed. "You paid for the roof restoration? And the plumbing, and the heating retrofit. I didn't announce it because I wasn't looking for credit." Charlotte opened her mouth, then closed it. Silence again, broken only by the hum of the air vent. Dr. Shaw returned to the task at hand. To move forward, a shared governance model could be discussed. It would require amending the trust with mutual consent. "That's your suggestion?" Dad snapped. It's mine, Charlotte interjected, voice unusually quiet. We form a foundation. The house remains protected. We all have a say. I studied her for a moment. She wasn't bluffing, not entirely, but she wasn't yielding either. Rachel turned to me. If we agree to shared governance and acknowledge your investment, would you stay involved? I hesitated. Mom spoke next, deliberate and unsteady. We owe her more than silence. It landed like a stone in water. Howard looked to me. Camille, the floor is yours. I stood, smoothing the hem of my navy dress. Here are my terms. 1. We create a foundation. Yes, but the majority voting power remains with the trustee unless unanimous consent is reached. 2. Charlotte and Rachel contribute financially, matched to my historical investment over 10 years. 3. No alterations without historical board approval. And 4. My stewardship is acknowledged, formally, publicly. In writing, Charlotte stiffened. You're asking a lot. I've already given more. The words weren't sharp. They weren't loud, but they landed. Rachel looked at Charlotte, then at me. If we agree, you'd still let us raise our family there? I paused. This was the moment, the hinge on which so much turned. If you understand, it's not yours to reshape, I said, but ours to protect. Then yes. Rachel exhaled, something like relief passing across her face. Dad looked like he might protest again, but Mom placed a hand on his wrist, gentle and firm. That gesture said more than anything else she could have said aloud. Howard leaned back. I'll begin drafting the amendment proposals. On the screen, Dr. Shaw nodded, and I'll follow up with structural recommendations and preservation timelines. The room buzzed with quiet movement. Papers shuffled, chairs creaked, but I stayed still, rooted in the space I once feared stepping into. My hands rested on the polished table, steady. It wasn't over, but it was different now. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one explaining myself. The light in Oak Ridge had changed. It wasn't the filtered gold that came through the stained glass windows or the way the breeze rolled through the cracked open windows. It was something quieter, lighter. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't weigh on me. It simply stood. I ran my hand along the familiar walnut railing as I made my way downstairs. Every step echoed like a memory. The squeaky floorboard outside the linen closet, the dip in the hallway where my grandfather once tripped during a Christmas toast. I'd preserved those details intentionally, not out of nostalgia, but because history, real history, isn't always pretty. It's honest. The drawing room was set for signing. Oak Ridge had seen 1,000 signatures over the years, deeds, certificates, ledgers in my grandfather's tight cursive, but none like this. Howard Galloway sat straight-backed at the long oak table, glasses perched low, tapping the side of his fountain pen like a metronome. Liam beside him had already pre-sorted the pages. My mother and father sat across from me, composed, unreadable. Charlotte and Rachel were seated at the far end, closer than they'd been in years, and yet still tentative. Rachel gave me a quick nod when I entered. Charlotte didn't. "Shall we begin?" Howard asked, breaking the silence. We did. No fanfare. No notary stamps louder than the scratch of pens. I signed first as trustee, then Charlotte, then Rachel, then my parents, who paused before signing the formal acknowledgement of my contributions. $573,000 over a decade, itemized. My father's signature was stiff, my mother's softer. The final paper was passed to Liam, a document formalizing the formation of the Stratton Preservation Foundation, co-managed by Charlotte, Rachel, and myself. Oversight rules included a preservation clause, mandatory financial contributions from residents, and quarterly review meetings. We'd written it together, begrudgingly at first, but eventually with a kind of rhythm. Rachel reached for the champagne, not the expensive kind this time, just a bottle we'd picked up from a local vineyard. She poured 5 glasses, hesitated, then poured a 6th, and handed it to Mrs. Woodbury, who had been standing in the doorway. "To Oak Ridge," Rachel said quietly. To all of us, whether we understood it or not. We drank. Even my father. The toast was awkward, clipped, but it was honest. No masks, no flattery, just acceptance. Afterward, people scattered across the house. Howard gathered his briefcase. Liam lingered by the hallway as if unsure whether to congratulate or retreat. My parents wandered into the garden, hands behind their backs like tourists in a place they thought they owned. I stayed behind. I needed a few more moments in the library. The late afternoon sun fell over the shelves like spilled honey, casting soft shadows against the worn spines. The scent was the same, leather, cedar, ink. I leaned against the heavy frame of the arched doorway, breathing it in. "You always loved this room," Charlotte said from behind me. I turned. She stood there, arms folded, not in defense, but habit. "I did," I said. "Still do." She stepped inside, eyes scanning the shelves. "I hated you sometimes," she said, voice low. "I know. I thought you were better than us." "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped needing your permission to be equal." We stood in silence. No hugging, no dramatic reconciliation, but something in her shoulders shifted. She wasn't bracing anymore. "I meant what I said," I added. "I want Oak Ridge to be a home, not just a house with rules." Charlotte nodded. "Then maybe we'll learn how." I stepped past her, brushing fingers along the grandfather clock as I passed. Outside, the summer air was thick with honeysuckle and dust. The sky had turned watercolor pink, streaked with soft lavender clouds. Mrs. Woodbury waited near the front door with a small paper bag. She didn't speak. She never did when it counted. But the lemon cookie inside said more than words. I smiled and accepted it, tucking it into my purse like a relic. I walked to my car alone. I didn't look back at the house. Not at first. But at the end of the driveway, something pulled me to stop. Oak Ridge stood behind me, tall and stubborn as ever. But it looked different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I rolled down my window and let the warm air in as I drove through the open gates. I didn't know when I'd be back, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to know. I wasn't leaving something behind. I was carrying it with me. Sometimes a house doesn't change, but the people within it do. That summer evening, as I left Oak Ridge behind with the windows rolled down and the past finally settled, I didn't feel smaller for what I gave. I felt clearer for what I reclaimed. Families aren't always fair, and love isn't always loud. But when we choose truth over resentment and respect over silence, even the most tangled legacies can become something new. In life, we don't always need to win. We need to be heard, and sometimes that's enough. If this story reminded you of your own family journey, I'd love to hear it. What truths have you had to hold on to quietly, and what have they taught you?